The heat in the New Mexico territory felt alive that summer. It pressed down on the earth until the ground cracked, turning the land into a hard and brittle shell. Even the sky looked stretched thin, a flat sheet of blue that offered no comfort. Ezra Holt stood on the porch of his ranch house, staring across the trembling horizon, where the heat shimmered like ghosts. To anyone passing through, Broken Creek Ranch looked strong, with its limestone foundation, heavy timber barn, and straight corral lines. But Ezra knew better. The ranch was bleeding, and he was running out of ways to keep it alive. Ezra was 42, tall, solid, and worn by years of work and grief. His face carried deep lines around the eyes, from long days in the sun and long nights without sleep. Since his wife Clara died 3 years earlier, the house felt too quiet, and the land felt heavier on his shoulders. He worked hard, stayed honest, and paid his men before he paid himself. But rumors had been moving across the territory like a sickness. Silas Crow and his syndicate were swallowing ranches whole. They bought water rights, cut supply lines, and starved out families before buying their deeds for almost nothing. Ezra knew it was only a matter of time before Crow turned his eyes on Broken Creek. He headed toward the corral where Pike, his foreman, was overseeing the shoeing of a mare. Pike was broad, mean-tempered, and loyal as long as he was paid on time. Without looking up, Pike spit tobacco juice into the dust. "North tank's almost dry," he said. "Crow's men are patrolling the high pasture again, claiming grazing rights." "They can claim the moon," Ezra replied. "This land's been ours since '55. "Paper don't stop bullets," Pike muttered. He looked uneasy. "The boys are nervous. Some asked for early pay. Others hear Crow's offering $40 a month." "Let them go if they want," Ezra said, but his stomach tightened. Loyalty didn't fill a man's pantry. He walked toward the gate to check the south fence line, but something made him stop. A shape on the road moved toward the ranch, blurred by the heat waves. Ezra narrowed his eyes. It was rare for anyone to walk this far on foot. As the figure drew closer, he saw a woman leading a horse that limped badly on the left foreleg. When she reached the gate, she stopped 10 feet from him. She was Mexican-American, maybe 30 years old, small but strong, with dark eyes sharp enough to read danger before it arrived. Dust coated her skirt and oversized shirt. She looked exhausted, but she stood straight. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was dry, but steady. Ezra looked at the lame horse, then at her. "I'm not hiring cooks." "I'm not a cook," she said. "I'm a trainer. I can break anything with 4 legs and a bad temper. My name is Lucia Reyes." Ezra raised an eyebrow. She didn't look like she could take a stallion kick, but something in her stillness made him pause. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of anything, not anymore. "You walked a long way to tell a joke," Ezra said. "No joke," Lucia replied. "I'll work for half pay until you see what I can do." Ezra opened the gate. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet determination in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she checked his gun and hands before his face. Only people with scars learn to read danger like that. "Bring the horse to the trough," he said. Lucia walked past him, her posture stiff and guarded. At the corral, Pike and 2 hands, Toby and Dutch, leaned against the fence, watching with smirks. "Well now," Pike called. "Boss brought home a stray." Ezra ignored him. Lucia let her horse drink and splashed water on her face. Ezra studied her movements, quick, skilled, careful. "Where'd you work before?" he asked. "South," she said, "near the border." "Why leave?" Lucia stiffened. She turned her head, and for a moment, the collar of her shirt slipped. Ezra saw it. Raised scars, old and brutal, running from her neck toward her shoulder. Not an accident. Not a small injury. A mark of someone who had lived through something violent and walked away anyway. His eyes widened before he could stop himself. Lucia snapped the collar shut. Her eyes burned. "Don't look there." It was not a plea. It was a warning. Ezra stepped back, giving her space. He lowered his eyes, then lifted them again to meet hers directly. No staring, no questions. Just respect. "I've got a tack room at the end of the barn," he said quietly. "Heavy door," Bolt on the inside. Only you get the key." Lucia watched him carefully. He could see her weighing everything: the barn, the distance to the gate, the men watching, his tone. "The pay is 20 a month. If you can do the work." "I can do the work," she said. The next morning, the men gathered at the breaking pen. Word had spread. The new woman was going to try riding the Baron, a sorrel gelding known for throwing riders harder than a bull. Pike grinned, placing bets. 5 seconds, he said, no more. Lucia entered the pen without a rope or saddle. She moved slow, calm, patient. The horse snorted and threatened, but she never flinched. She waited. She hummed. She touched the horse's shoulder with steady hands. And when she finally swung onto his back, the pen exploded. The Baron bucked like he was trying to kill her. Dust clouded the sky. Men yelled. Pike swore. But Lucia held on. She moved with the horse, not against him. She rode the storm like she'd lived through worse. 5 minutes later, the horse stopped, sweating, defeated, calm under her hand. The corral fell silent. Ezra felt something shift inside him. Respect, and something else he wasn't ready to name. "Pay the lady her respect," Ezra said. Pike sneered. "She's bad luck. A woman like that wandering alone. Probably a—" Ezra stepped toward him so fast, Pike swallowed the rest of the insult. "You're done talking." Lucia walked the horse, pretending not to hear, but she had, and she saw who defended her. That night, as the sun bled across the sky, Ezra sat on his porch. Down by the barn, Lucia's lamp glowed through the tack room window. She was behind a bolted door. Safe. For now. But high on the mesa ridge, 2 riders watched the ranch. "Hole's weak," one said, "and he's got a soft spot now." The other laughed. "That woman will break him. And when she does, Crow will take everything." The riders disappeared into the dark, and the war for Broken Creek Ranch had just begun. The weeks after Lucia Reyes arrived at Broken Creek Ranch changed the rhythm of the place. She worked quietly, moving through the stables before sunrise and long after sunset. Ezra noticed how the horses listened to her, how even the sick ones calmed under her hands. She saved a mare with a deep wire cut. She fixed the swollen leg of a steer Pike wanted to shoot. She slept in the tack room with the wounded animals when needed. Ezra watched the numbers in his ledger shift, small improvements that meant survival. But with the good came danger. Summer turned into a dry and angry season. The creek shrank to a thin brown line. Dust blew in through the windows and coated everything in a fine powder. Wolves came down at night, hungry and bold. Ezra doubled the night watch. Men grew restless. Pike muttered that Lucia's arrival had brought bad luck. Ezra ignored him, but the pressure was building. One afternoon, Ezra and Lucia rode out to check a windmill on the North Range. The air was still and heavy. Suddenly the wind died. The silence wrapped around them, unnatural and frightening. Lucia looked north. A massive wall of dark dust rose into the sky like a mountain made of earth. "Dust storm," Ezra said. They raced across the range to push the scattered cattle into a narrow box canyon. The storm hit with the force of a hammer. Sand slammed against their bodies, stinging their skin. The sky turned black. They couldn't see their own horses. Heads. The herd panicked, but Ezra and Lucia fought through the darkness, driving the cattle into shelter. When the worst of the wind passed, they realized they were miles from home and visibility was nearly zero. "We can't make it back," Ezra shouted. "Line shack!" "Half a mile east." They rode blind through the swirling grit until the small shack appeared like a gravestone in the storm. They pushed the horses inside the lean-to, covered their nostrils, then forced their way into the shack and barred the door. Inside, the silence was sharp. Dust coated their clothes. The shack was barely big enough for 2 people. A lantern flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Ezra checked the water barrel, then lowered himself to the floor, coughing. Lucia sat across from him, her posture tense. She did not remove her boots. She did not relax. The storm outside felt safer to her than an enclosed room with a man she did not fully trust yet. Ezra took a sip of water and passed her the canteen. "You ride well," he said. She looked at him. "Better than Pike," she answered. Ezra gave a dry laugh. "Not hard to do." Silence settled again. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy. Ezra found himself speaking words he had kept buried for years. "My wife loved storms," he said quietly. "She said they washed the world clean." Lucia listened. She did not interrupt. She waited. "She died in the fever," Ezra said. "I survived. I don't know why." Lucia stared at the lantern. Her voice softened, but her words were sharp. "It is not math. It is luck, and luck is cruel." Ezra looked at her scars, hidden beneath cloth and shadow. "You have had your share of it," he said. Lucia did not deny it. Instead, she told him the truth she had never spoken at the ranch. About her father's land near the border. About a man who had used the law to take everything. About the sheriff who wasn't a sheriff. About the house that was burned, her brothers killed, her father gunned down. She told him about Don Armando, a man who offered safety but chained her to his home. She told him how she escaped, on foot, half dead, swearing never to let another man decide her fate. Ezra's hands tightened on his knees. He looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and fury. Fury at the world that hurt her, sorrow that he could not change the past. "You're safe here," he said. Lucia looked at him with eyes that had learned to see lies. But she did not look away. "Safety is a promise men make when the walls are still standing," she said. "But walls fall." Ezra did not argue, he understood. The night grew colder. The only blanket in the shack was thin and small. Ezra held it out. "We have to share," he said, "for warmth." Lucia hesitated. Then she nodded. They sat side by side on the floor, backs against the wall, the blanket draped over both their shoulders. They did not touch, but the heat of their bodies filled the small distance between them. Ezra could smell the sage in her hair. Lucia could hear the steady strength of his breathing. Neither slept well, but neither slept alone. The storm ended by morning. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but something between them had shifted. It was subtle, like a door opening only an inch, but it was enough. 2 weeks later, Lucia rode the buckboard into town for supplies. She kept her head down. She spoke to no one. But trouble still found her. Deputy Vance accused her of stealing a silver watch from the mercantile. He grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back, and shoved her into the jail cell. Townspeople gathered to stare at her as if she were a criminal. Lucia sat on the narrow cot, her jaw tight, refusing to give them tears. Hours later, hooves thundered down the street. Ezra Holt rode into town like a storm, his face dark as thunderclouds. He threw open the jailhouse door and slammed a heavy leather pouch on Vance's desk. $50, Ezra said, her bail. Vance stammered. Ezra did not wait. He demanded the key, opened the cell, and Lucia stepped out, chin high, eyes burning, but dry. Outside, one of Crow's enforcers laughed and shouted, "That's a lot of money for a bed warmer." Ezra handed Lucia the reins of his horse. "Hold this," he said. Then he walked toward Stark and hit him so hard, the man dropped into the dust. No one else in town laughed. That night, Lucia cleaned Ezra's split knuckles. Her hands were gentle. Her voice was quiet. "You made an enemy of the whole town," she said. Ezra watched her work. "They were already enemies," he said. "Now they know where I stand." Lucia looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time. "This isn't over," she whispered. Ezra nodded. "No, it's just beginning." Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside the ranch had found its first spark of fire. Tension settled over Broken Creek Ranch like a heavy winter blanket. The men felt it. The horses felt it. Even the cattle grew restless, as if they sensed danger in the wind. Ezra tried to keep everyone working, but whispers spread through the bunkhouse. Crow's riders were seen near the South Ridge. Supplies had been stolen from the storage shed. Fence posts were cut in the night. Pike blamed Lucia for all of it. One morning just before sunrise, Pike cornered Ezra outside the barn. The air was cold, and a pale gray light washed over Pike's angry face. "She's trouble," Pike said. "Ever since she came, the ranch is falling apart. The men don't trust her. They don't trust you for defending her either." Ezra kept his voice calm. "If they don't trust me, they can leave." "Maybe we will," Pike growled. "Maybe Crow pays better." Ezra stepped closer. "If you ever threaten her again, you're gone." Pike stared at him for a long moment, then spat in the dirt and walked away. Ezra knew something was coming. He just didn't know how soon. By noon, Lucia had taken the bay mare out to the back pasture to check on a new foal. The sky was clear and blue, but she kept looking over her shoulder. The land felt too quiet. When she dismounted near the creek, the hair on her arms rose. She wasn't alone. 3 riders stepped out from behind the cottonwoods. All wore dark coats and hard expressions. The man in front, the one with a scar that crossed his jaw, tipped his hat. "Lucia Reyes," he said. "Don Armando sends his regards." Lucia froze. She had crossed a border to escape that man. She thought she had run far enough. She thought she had buried his reach behind her. But fear hit her so fast it felt like she had been kicked in the ribs. "No," Lucia whispered. The man smiled. "He found you. He always finds what is his." Lucia grabbed the mare's reins, but the men surrounded her. One reached for her arm and instinct took over. She broke his nose with her elbow, ducked under another's swing, and ran toward the mare. She barely got one foot in the stirrup before a fist caught her in the side and knocked her to the ground. The world blurred for a moment. "Don't fight," the scarred man said. "It only makes things worse." Lucia gasped for air, her ribs throbbing. Sand filled her mouth. She tried to crawl away, but a boot pressed down on her back. Then a rifle shot cracked through the air. The boot lifted. The men spun around. Ezra rode toward them at full gallop, his face carved with fury. Dust billowed behind him. He fired again, hitting the ground inches from the scarred man's feet. The riders scrambled for cover. Ezra jumped from his horse before it even stopped. He stood over Lucia, aiming the rifle at the men. "Leave," he said. "Now." "She belongs to Don Armando," the scarred man hissed. "She belongs to no man," Ezra said. The riders hesitated, then mounted up and retreated toward the ridge. Before leaving, the scarred man pointed at Ezra. "You just signed your own death." Ezra didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared. When the danger passed, he knelt beside Lucia. Her breath was shaky. Blood stained her shirt where the boot had crushed her ribs. "You found me," she said, her voice thin. Ezra brushed dirt from her cheek. "Always." He lifted her gently onto his horse and rode back to the ranch. She leaned against his chest, her pain sharp but her fear fading. She wasn't alone anymore. When they reached the barn, Toby helped carry her inside. Pike watched from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ezra asked Toby to fetch bandages. Lucia refused to lie down until she could breathe again. Ezra knelt beside her. "You're safe here," he said. Lucia shook her head. "No one is safe if Don Armando wants them. You should send me away." Ezra looked at her, his jaw tight.
"I'm not losing you."
Her eyes softened. She placed her hand over his. "You don't know what you're risking." "I know enough," Ezra said. Before she could answer, the church bell in town rang out, loud and frantic. "A warning!" Toby rushed in. "Boss, riders coming from the ridge. A lot of them. Crow's men. And Don Armando's." Ezra stood, grabbed his rifle, and walked out of the tack room. The ranch hands gathered near the corral, tense and afraid. Pike stepped forward. "You brought war to this ranch," Pike said to Ezra. Ezra loaded his rifle. "Crow brought the war. Armando brought the war. I brought a woman who's done nothing but save this ranch." Pike hesitated. Then his eyes flicked toward the road where dust was rising. "I'm not dying for her," Pike said. Ezra stared at him. "Then get off my land." Pike left without another word. Dutch followed. 3 more men walked away. Only Toby stayed. The thunder of hooves grew louder. Lucia, weak but standing, walked out of the barn and stood beside Ezra. "You can't fight them alone." Ezra tightened his grip on the rifle. "Not alone," he said, "with you." But before the enemy reached the gate, something unexpected happened. Dozens of ranchers from neighboring homesteads appeared over the ridge riding fast. Men Ezra had fixed fences with, men who owed him favors, men his wife had fed during hard winters. They formed a long, solid line behind the Broken Creek fence. One of them shouted, "Holt, we're with you!" Ezra looked at Lucia, her eyes filled with something she had not felt in years. Hope. Crow's riders slowed. Don Armando's men hesitated. They were not expecting a small army. The standoff lasted forever. Then the scarred man cursed, turned his horse, and led the men away. The moment they vanished, the ranchers cheered. Toby shouted. Ezra let out a long breath. His knees almost buckled. Lucia stepped close, her hand brushing his cheek. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You saved my life." Ezra looked at her the same way he looked at a sunrise after years of darkness. "Stay," he said. "Stay here, with me." Lucia placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady strength inside him. "I'll stay," she whispered. "I finally found a place where I'm not running." The danger was not gone forever. Don Armando would rise again, but for now Broken Creek Ranch stood strong. And for the first time in years, Ezra Holt did not face the world alone.